First, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in an extraordinary articulation by Abu Bakr al-Baqallani, one of the great intellects of this ummah, when they said, لَيْسَ مُتَّصِلًا بِخَلْقِهِ وَلَا مُنْفَصِلٌ عَنْهُ, he is neither connected to his creation nor separated from his creation. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Allah is not the supreme being with all these inferior beings. La ilaha illallah. And this is the depth of the Muslim understanding. The Muslims had the deepest and most profound understanding based on their knowledge of the Qur'an and on their knowledge of the Arabic language. The next is the ilm al-nubuwwah, which is knowledge of the prophets themselves. The Qur'an gives us knowledge of what is nubuwwah. Once we identify that there is no God but Allah, that Allah is actually giving us a message, then who is the messenger? The messengers are clearly identified as men that come from the purest of human beings, and they articulate the truth for creation in different times and places. The next one is al-ma'ad. Where are we going? فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ. Where then are you going? This is the great Quranic question that every single individual must come to terms with. If people don't want to think about where they came from, which most people don't, and people like Stephen Jay Gould aren't really thinking about where they came from, because these people, all they look at is how. They never look at why. You see, evolution looks at how all this happened. It never looks at why. Why has this come about? Whether we believe in evolution or not is irrelevant in terms of the question itself. Why did this stuff come about? Where did it come from? Who brought it into existence? And so knowledge of al-ma'ad, that we are going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we will be in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, and we will be asked and taken into account for. This is the ilm al-ma'ad. The next emphasis of the Qur'an is ahkam. Once you accept your Lord, you accept that there's messengers, you accept that there's a final reckoning, how then do you live in the earth? How do you live with human beings? How do you live and worship Allah? And this is the realm of ahkam in the Qur'an. There are only 500 verses in the Qur'an that deal with ahkam, either explicitly or implicitly. It's not a great deal out of the 6,236, I believe, verses of the Qur'an. I don't know where they get 6,666. I see that in books. Quit, people, whoever's writing that, quit writing that. That scares the Christians. They put, there's 6,666 verses in the Qur'an. I don't know who, I think a Christian wrote a book, first of all, and then Muslims just been reading that book and getting the information, because that's not how many ayahs of the Qur'an. But it scares them because it's the number of the Antichrist in their eschatology. So after understanding the ahkam and applying them in our lives, Allah gives us again targhib and tarhib, which is wa'ad and wa'id in the Qur'an. What we're promised if we follow the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we follow the sunnah of the messenger. وَلَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. You have in the messenger the best example for those who are yearning for the next life, who desire Allah's pleasure and desire to meet Allah in the next life and do much remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the wa'd is there, and the wa'id, which is again the tarhib, that Allah promises if we deviate from the Qur'an, what will happen to us. And we are witnessing that everywhere. This is one of the beauties of the Qur'an, is that it empowers the human being and allows us to know why we are where we are and how we can get out of the situation we're in. If you look all over the Muslim world, wallahi, I after deep deliberation about these things, I have come to the conclusion that all of this is in reality a rahmah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and nothing else. This is a rahmah from Allah to this ummah. جُعِدَ عَذَابُ أُمَّتِي فِي دُنْيَاهَا. The punishment of my ummah was placed in the dunya, and this is a rahmah from Allah in order that we might return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has frightening and devastating ways of bringing His people back to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are warned about this in the Qur'an, so we should see these things. عَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Perhaps you detest a thing, but in it is much good for you. And Allah knows. Allah knows. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. You do not know. We do not understand existence fully. And then the last aspect out of these 7 is the idea of qisas, which is the Qur'an contains stories of those who went before us. Now the stories of those who went before us are there to teach us that we are part of an unbroken chain of struggle. The deen by its nature is mujahada, it is struggle. We are part of an unbroken chain of struggle that will continue until the end of time. It is the struggle of truth and falsehood. They fight one another, and this is the nature. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give victory to those who are patient amongst us. And this is why, inna Allah ma'a sabirin. What we see from those who went before us was the deep patience that they had. The deep, deep patience that they had in taking this message out, in suffering for it. وَأْمِرْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَانْهَى عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا أَصَابَكَ. Command to good, forbid evil, and be patient about what afflicts you from doing that. تَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. They enjoin right and they enjoin patience. By the nature of enjoining right, you will suffer afflictions. These are the 7 that Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi identifies in the Qur'an. Now what I would like to do is just talk a little bit about how then all of us agree that the Qur'an is the way out. I don't think, I've heard this so many times, what is the way out? And I've said it myself, the Qur'an. How is it then do we get from understanding this at the rational level in the intellect to literally experiencing it and living it in our lives? I believe that the Qur'an itself gives us the methodology for doing that. The first thing I want to say is that although there's a lot of work been done on the scientific miracles of the Qur'an, Abdul Majid Zindani has done extraordinary work, and really many people have been influenced and impacted by it. I personally do not believe that I think the scientific miracles of the Qur'an are insignificant in relation to the purpose of the Qur'an, because I do not believe that the purpose of the Qur'an is to be a book of science. There are miracles of science, no doubt, in the Qur'an, in embryology, extraordinary things, and in geography and geology and other sciences. They are there, and it's good work for people to identify those things because it's part of what they call al-i'jaz al-ilmi, or the incapacitating nature of the science in the Qur'an. But the primary i'jaz of the Qur'an is linguistic. And what I would like to do is look at a statement made by a man, Jeremy Campbell, who wrote a book about information theory. He says in here, evidently nature can no longer be seen as matter and energy alone, which is the 19th century view of reality, matter and energy alone. Nor can all her secrets be unlocked with the keys of chemistry and physics, which is what human beings have been attempting to do, to understand reality at the biochemical level, at the atomic level. This is materialism at its sickest. Brilliantly successful as these 2 branches of science have been in our century, a 3rd component is needed for any explanation of the world that claims to be complete. The powerful theories of chemistry and physics must be added a late arrival, a theory of information. Nature must be interpreted as matter, energy, and information. Nature must be interpreted as matter, energy, and information. That is the Quranic worldview. The Quranic worldview tells us that what we see and witness outside of ourselves are signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what we see and witness inside of ourselves are signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The witnessing itself is not simply a witnessing with the eye, which is the physical, but it's a witnessing with the heart itself, which is a supraphysical, a metaphysical witnessing, articulated by our scholars when they say, ash-shahada qawlun sadara an ilmin bimushahadatin basaran wa basiratan. That our witnessing that Allah, there is no God but He, is a articulation that manifests out of a knowledge gained by witnessing, mushahada, basaran, with our own eyes, wa basiratan, and with our hearts. And this is why the human being, according to the founder, I mean the Qur'an itself, but the founder of information theory, Claude Shannon, who's the founder of this theory of information, says the human being is the ideal decoder. This is the function of the human being, is literally to decode. And the Qur'an itself is the It is the code, it is the translation